IndyPram is IndyPram on IndyLive.Radio. IndyPram is IndyPram on IndyLive.Radio.
Welcome to the IndyPram Podcast on Independence Live Radio. This is the start of a series of podcasts based on Scotland the Brief by Gordon MacIntyre-Kemp. What makes for a prosperous nation? There are 5 key prosperity factors. You can define what good for the economy means in several ways. Traditionalists seek simple measures. For example, is the economy growing and creating jobs? Progressives use more complex measures, which may include growth and job creation, but also seek to evaluate the well-being of society, the impact of the economy on the environment, and the level of inequality in a society, which is the gap between the rich and the poor, as well as other emerging measures. Whatever your definition of prosperity, traditionalist or progressive, the consensus is that prosperity is influenced by a number of nations' economic factors and to what extent they can be utilised on a per-head basis. For example, you might think in terms of natural wealth assets. 2 neighbouring nations possessing similar levels of oil reserves would experience similar contribution to their prosperity from the oil. However, that would only be the case if both nations had similar population size, and therefore the value of assets would be similar when divided on a per head of population basis. Many factors influence prosperity, but there are 5 key contributory factors. The natural wealth of a nation, including mineral and fossil fuel wealth, natural landscapes, land mass, the quality of farming land, and the size and productivity of territorial waters. The ability to export goods. Here we look for a positive balance of trade in manufactured goods and raw materials with other nations. A track record in innovation. This involves looking at performance in both academic and applied research, as well as innovation within sectors such as information technology and biotechnology and life sciences. Advanced governmental and economic infrastructures. This includes mature but flexible institutions and systems of government, finance, enterprise, justice, tax and welfare. Essential to this is a parliament with the physical capital in terms of the infrastructure to invest in and oversee assets such as roads, railways and communication technology. Human capital and potential. This requires the measurement of the value added to a nation's economy by its people and the sum of their knowledge, skills, creativity, qualifications, and approach to work and society. Let's investigate each of these prosperity factors in detail to find out if an independent Scotland would have what it takes to be a prosperous nation. The natural wealth of Scotland. The natural wealth of a nation can form the bedrock of its economic success. Having vast natural wealth to rely on makes it easier for a nation to properly invest in developing the other factors needed to be a successful nation. Such is the case for Scotland. So how does Scotland's natural wealth compare with the rest of the UK, and even with Europe? An independent Scotland would be one of the world's most naturally wealthy nations. Research by the Office for National Statistics examined the value provided by natural resources such as land, wind, timber, water, fish stocks, oil and gas to Scotland's economy. It found that the value of Scottish natural capital was estimated to be a massive £273 billion. This isn't just the value of Scotland's oil to the economy. The value of oil soars once it's processed and ready to sell. To put that figure into context, with 8.4% of the UK population, Scotland's natural wealth represents 34% of the UK's as a whole. Our sustainable assets have other benefits, such as their value to our health, our well-being. Scotland's habitats are also responsible for removing 29% of the UK's most harmful pollutants. As well as possessing 4 times our population share of the UK's natural wealth, we produce about double our population share of the UK's food, at roughly 16%. This includes 18% of all the cattle in the UK, 70% of all the UK's fish landings, So again, this represents far more than Scotland's 8.4% population share of food production. How these assets are managed for the benefit of the Scottish economy and who is best placed to manage them is a question we will return to. However, it is worth noting that Norway, an independent northern European nation of similar size to Scotland, has managed to generate £386 billion more in oil and gas related revenues than the UK. This despite having produced roughly the same amount of oil since the North Sea started producing oil in the 1970s. Scotland's oil and gas production forecasts have risen nearly 50% in the past 4 years, and it is forecast there are at least 20 years of oil left. Scotland struck lucky in the North Sea with oil and gas, but as part of the UK the benefits were shared amongst the much larger UK population. Scotland has again been fortunate in the North Sea with its renewable energy potential, and as the world moves to a more sustainable economic model, Scotland is well positioned to benefit and lead the change. One of the world's most naturally wealthy nations, Scotland has the potential to create sustainable prosperity for its people, and therefore protecting Scotland's natural assets is key to Scotland's future well-being. Scotland's natural wealth could clearly be one of the key foundations of Scotland's future prosperity as an independent nation. It is unreasonable to believe that a country as naturally wealthy as Scotland would not thrive if it were to gain the power to manage these resources for Scotland's benefit, rather than have those benefits diluted and distributed across the rest of the UK. Scotland's natural wealth is something to be stewarded and safeguarded for future generations, rather than exploited for short-term financial gain, or to pay down debt from other parts of the UK, as has been the policy of successive UK governments. Scotland's exporting performance. A major bonus for any nation's economy is the ability to export specialised manufactured goods. This is one of Scotland's key strengths. In highly developed economies such as Scotland's, it takes technological advantages or the natural wealth we have seen to develop the specialisms that create high-value export demand and higher prices. This in turn creates new jobs of a higher quality that pay higher wages than would otherwise be the case. Let's look at Scotland's export performance. Scotland is already an exporting powerhouse and possesses several significant advantages when it comes to developing its specialisms. For example, Scotland's vast unspoilt green and mountainous scenery, its lochs, glens and rivers contribute to customer perceptions that food and drink from Scotland is more natural and therefore more desirable and even more valuable. 60% of Scotland's seafood landings are exported. Scotch whisky, which can legally only be produced in Scotland, accounts for 19% of the whole of the UK's food and drink export trade, with 41 bottles of Scotch exported per second in 2018. Scottish food exports also have skyrocketed, increasing 23% since 2014. Oil and gas exports are also performing well. Added to this, Scottish oil and gas supply chain companies have been winning contracts abroad, exporting their world-leading expertise. In 2016, which is when the most recently available data was published, oil and gas supply chain company exports amounted to £4.5 billion, almost matching the £4.65 billion in actual oil and gas exports. So how does Scotland's performance compare with other nations? Examining the international exports of goods for all of the UK nations produced by HMRC, we see that Scotland is the only UK nation to have internationally exported more goods than it is imported every year since records began. In the past few years, Northern Ireland has generated a surplus in goods, but persistently operated a deficit. England and Wales always run persistent deficits in international trade in goods. Scotland's exporting success runs contrary to the UK's performance as a whole. Indeed, Scotland has achieved its success despite major container ports being mothballed after privatisation. This means almost all of its exported goods suffer the added difficulty of needing to travel through England to be exported, creating what is known as export friction. Scotland has a hugely positive reputation for quality, natural beauty, history, natural resources, expertise and technological innovations, and for high-quality specialty products such as Scotch whisky. It is this reputation that premium international buyers perceive on Scotland's beef, salmon and seafood in particular that drives Scotland's exporting success. Scotland's exports per head versus the rest of the UK are £17,456 per year for Scotland versus a staggeringly low £8,646 for the rest of the UK, excluding Scotland. Scotland's exports in goods are more than twice the UK's on a per head basis, clearly demonstrating that Scotland is an exporting nation, whilst the remainder of the UK is an importing nation. Scotland's international exports support more than 300,000 Scottish jobs. For every 100 jobs supported by exporting, an additional 66 jobs are supported through spillover benefits to the Scottish economy. International exports currently account for 20% of Scotland's economy, or gross domestic product, GDP. The Scottish Government has announced a plan to increase that to 25% in the next decade, which would create 17,500 new jobs. This would add 2% to the economy and generate roughly £500 million in additional Scottish Government revenues per year. A surplus in international trade in goods is a key strength of Scotland's economy, but how does that compare to other similar Northern European nations? Denmark sets the gold standard in exports and so is clearly a nation that Scotland needs to aspire to match in the medium to longer term. It is worth noting that Denmark does not even come close to having the natural wealth or as broad-based an economy as Scotland enjoys. Achieving a greater exporting ratio per head than nations such as Finland and Sweden, and being close to Norway, is a significant result for Scotland. We can't cover exporting without discussing Brexit. The UK as a whole voted to leave the European Union in 2016 by 48% to 52%, while Scotland voted to remain 62% to 38%. As such, the impact on Scotland's economy is key to understanding the question of prosperity and independence. A no-deal Brexit, which now seems more likely, would be devastating to Scotland's economy. Ironically, our exporting success means that Brexit will impact more negatively on Scotland than on the remainder of the UK. According to the Fraser of Allender Institute, a no-deal Brexit, which could still happen if trade deals are not agreed by the end of 2020, would slash Scotland's exports by up to 11%, reduce our government revenues and result in a potentially 80,000 job losses. However, a series of 2020 trade deals creating a softer Brexit with something similar to a customs union but no single market access would still see tens of thousands of job losses and a significant decrease in exports. The rest of the UK, and especially England's international trade deficit in goods, is massive, and so Brexit represents a clear and present danger to economic stability, given that the UK trade deficit would significantly worsen and that London's finance sector's dominance would be diminished. This would have a knock-on detrimental effect on its ability to compensate for England's poor trade figures through a surplus in international financial transactions. When it comes to exporting, Scotland has many vital advantages and significant untapped potential. However, the effect of Scotland's ports closing has meant that goods are forced to travel further to be exported. That, combined with the new dangers of Brexit, means that Scottish exports and the Scottish economy are far more likely to thrive with the bespoke policies and attention that they would receive in an independent Scotland. We now look at Scotland's track record on innovation. Innovation is the key to driving Scotland's economy to future success. Research shows that Scotland is an innovative nation, excelling across many sectors such as information technology, life sciences, software, gaming, space technologies, and even in terms of university research grants. Scotland is performing well, but it can still do better. The nature of innovation is changing, and Scotland needs to invest and promote innovation so our economy can grow in added value sectors and create more highly skilled, highly paid, better quality jobs. Some of the innovation-led sectors in which Scotland has a leading presence have experienced astonishing growth. For instance, the life sciences sector saw a 29% growth in turnover between 2010 and 2014, while the software sector expanded by 72% over an 8-year period, with a projected growth of 16% in the next 5 years, forecast to create 64,000 new jobs. The rapid growth in gaming companies, up to 1,900% over a 9-year period, demonstrates that Scotland's entrepreneurial base is innovative and ready to lead in emerging new sectors. The fact that Scotland and Glasgow's space industry in particular is leading the way in selling satellite technology across Europe is something that often surprises people, with 70 satellites a year built in Glasgow. It is no surprise that Scotland will also be the location of the first spaceport in the UK. So let's have a look at Scotland's innovation performance. Scotland is ranked 41st out of 220 EU regions in terms of innovation. As such, the European Commission categorises us as a regional innovation leader. The Innovation Foundation Nesta ranks Edinburgh first out of 60 European cities for start-up firms and puts it in the top 5 for lifestyle, market and entrepreneur, culture and innovation. On a per-head basis, Scotland wins 43% more EU research funding than the rest of the United Kingdom. Scotland is currently the leading location in the UK for attracting research and development-related foreign direct investment. This has increased 70% year on year, illustrating enhanced confidence in Scotland as a leading location for science and technology companies. We often think of innovation as the breakthrough technology that cures a disease or solves a problem in a new way. However, these eureka moments are few and far between. Real economic growth comes from what is known as close to the market, applied or downstream innovation. Downstream innovation is all about adding value to existing products, understanding customer needs, analysing niches, creating proofs of concept and testing prototypes. The need for businesses of all sizes to connect to and partner with universities conducting relevant research is key. The fact that we have 4 universities in the top 200 for research is a real advantage, but one we have not been able to take full advantage of as part of the UK. The USA has a giant lead in innovation due to the size of its technology cluster and the willingness of a huge group of tech investors to put their money at risk in new research-led ventures. In the UK, there is nothing even remotely like an investment cluster outside of London, meaning the Scottish Government has to intervene. However, the Scottish Government has limited powers and finances. It is therefore restricted in what it can achieve. The Scottish National Investment Bank is a start, and the new £5 million investment and interface, a programme which connects companies with universities, colleges and research organisations, is also good news. This comes on top of the Scottish Government's 3-year £78 million fund for business that offered bespoke advice and financial support to mostly small to medium-sized businesses looking to innovate. The fund's goals included helping an additional 1,200 businesses work directly with universities, creating an open dialogue on innovation through Scotland's Can Do Innovation Forum. The Scottish Government doesn't have the power to change corporation tax and offer credits to encourage innovation, nor does it have any control over the nation's defence budget, most of which does not directly benefit Scotland's economy as it was spent elsewhere. Defence spending directly impacts on innovation and the spin-out benefits to defence-related innovations, even in collaboration with other nations, are enormous. Independent nations with similar population sizes to Scotland, such as Norway, Belgium and the Netherlands, outperform the UK on research and development spend, as do larger nations such as Germany and France. It is clear from this that the UK's innovation policy is lacking in ambition and that this negatively impacts on Scotland. The faster-growing, more prosperous, smaller European nations spend on average over 3% of GDP on research and development, yet the UK spends only 1.68%. A report by Nesta claimed that if Scotland could build towards an R&D spend of 3.4% of GDP over a 5-year period, this would mean that its economy would grow by around £12 billion annually. Small and medium employers are a large part of Scotland's economy, and they employ more people for less turnover. This creates more jobs than in nations dominated by large corporates, but in turn reduces the top-line productivity ratio of the Scottish economy. One of the best opportunities for rapid growth and increasing productivity in the Scottish economy is to rapidly increase research and development commercialisation, as well as innovation and productivity investment in small-medium employers. So to culminate our observations on Scotland as an innovation nation, Scotland is an innovation nation, but it lacks the powers to create the taxation, research connections and investment culture that could take the success to the next level. The key innovation sectors we currently have rely on EU skilled labour and access to the single market, so Westminster's Brexit infatuation is a real threat. Investing in innovation and cutting-edge industries, plus creating bespoke innovation policies for Scotland, rather than a one-size-fits-all policy which caters only for London and the South East needs, will be a key plank of the economic strategy of an independent Scotland. An independent Scotland would take control of the powers needed to turbocharge innovation. The key to building a better future for Scotland and an even stronger economy is to double down on innovation. Economic success depends on the economic infrastructure of a country, such as road and rail transport systems, adequate power and water supplies, working sewage systems, telecommunications, and broadband access. In developing nations, creating and improving these basic infrastructure assets is absolutely vital. In Scotland, we take these basic factors for granted, as do other highly developed Western and Northern European economies. Let's look first at Scotland's trading infrastructure. Scotland is a highly developed infrastructure for trade. As a highly developed economy that has punched above its weight in contributing to the UK, Scotland already possesses advanced infrastructure for trade, including the following. Rail. Outside of London, Scotland has 3 of the UK's top 10 busiest railway stations in terms of exits and entries. Glasgow Central is in second place, 33 million per annum. Edinburgh in 5th place, 32 million per annum. And Glasgow Queen Street, currently being refurbished, is 10th, 16 million per annum. As well as strong rail services to the major towns, the success of the new Borders Railway suggests that more rural daily routes connecting smaller towns, such as the recently announced Leavenmouth line, would be economically feasible. Air. Scotland's 5 main airports, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Glasgow Prestwick, Aberdeen and Inverness, have international flights that connect millions of passengers to around 150 destinations worldwide. Dundee has regular flights to London, and there are 9 more regional airports servicing the Highlands and Islands. Overall, there is an advanced infrastructure in place and plenty of room for expansion if needed. Sea. Scotland has 7 major international deep-water ports and ferry services connecting with mainland Europe, Ireland and Scotland's island communities. East coast ports such as Aberdeen and Sullenvoe on the Shetland Islands service Scotland's offshore industry. However, more than 70% of Scottish exports travel through England before leaving the UK through southern ports. This wouldn't be too big a problem if the UK had stayed in the EU, or at least in the single market and customs union. But given it is leaving without workable alternative arrangements in place, then Scotland will have to invest in its deep water container ports on both coasts to service America and the European markets. Brexit chaos will create logjams in southern ports, making exporting from Scotland far more difficult and time-consuming. Digital. By 2021, all Scottish premises will be covered by a 5G network. All 7 major cities in Scotland are working to become smart cities, reducing urban congestion, maximising energy efficiency, enhancing public safety, helping to improve air quality and traffic flow, and cutting pollution. Juniper Research placed Edinburgh and Glasgow 2nd and 3rd out of 10 in the UK ranking. Telecommunications is a matter reserved to Westminster, so Holyrood can encourage the uptake of new technologies such as 5G, but doesn't have the full powers it requires to create a competitive advantage for Scotland. Water. Having enough clean and fresh water is vital not just for homes and communities, but also for industry as well. The Scottish Parliament decided not to privatise Scottish Water, as all English and Welsh water companies were in the 1980s. As a result, the people of Scotland take clean, fresh water for granted in all but the most isolated areas. This represents an advantage for Scotland over the southeast of England in particular. Climate change and unsustainable population growth mean there is not enough water to supply both industry and homes in London and the southeast of England. England's Environmental Agency has reported that due to these factors, England will run out of water in 25 years. Only rapid and radical action to increase reservoir stocks, improve water supply infrastructure, decrease leaking and business usage could avoid shortages in England, but this is not a problem for Scotland. Scotland is a water-rich nation, whereas England is not. As an example, Loch Ness, one of Scotland's 27,000 freshwater lochs, contain more water than all the rivers and lakes in England and Wales combined. Scotland's rivers and lochs contain over 90% of UK fresh water. Scotland's water supply exceeds 100 times the amount it uses. Power and energy. Energy security is being a successful country. As a net exporter of power and with an advanced electricity supply networks, Scotland has that security. The rest of the UK buys 77.9% of all primary energy produced in Scotland, worth about £5 billion per year. In addition, approximately £10.6 billion of oil and gas is sold to the rest of the UK yearly, which is vital to the remaining UK economy. Renewables are crucial to combating climate change, and Scotland generated the equivalent of 69% of its electricity consumption from renewable sources in 2017. This is 45% higher than the amount the UK overall produces, and also demonstrates that Scotland's energy security is sustainable for the longer term. The installed capacity of renewable electricity generation sources across Scotland increased in 2018 to 10.9 gigawatts, with a further 12.6 gigawatts of capacity under construction, awaiting construction or in planning. Let's look at Scotland's government infrastructure and how that would evolve with independence. Devolution required that many Scottish governmental institutions be created, and recent further devolution has created the need for more infrastructure. This means that much of the governmental infrastructure that an independent Scotland would require is either in place already or is in the process of being developed. There are a few examples, such as social security and pensions, where management of a government department would have to be transferred to the Scottish Parliament's jurisdiction. Moving from devolution to independence in terms of governmental infrastructure. Prior to devolution, independence would have meant building a parliament and setting up multiple government agencies. There would not have been a Scottish government with experienced ministers for finance, trade, business, health and communities, education and social security. Currently, much of the delivery of public services in Scotland is already managed at subnational levels through local councils and local health boards. Scotland's governance infrastructure can be broken down into three categories: infrastructure already in place and under Scottish Government or local control, infrastructure already in place that would be transferred to the Scottish Government or local authority control in the event of independence, the new infrastructure required as a result of independence. Infrastructure already in place and under Scottish Government or local control. Scotland already possesses most of the essential institutions and infrastructure to administer and govern in some of the most important and largest policy areas, including a fully functioning, if not fully empowered, Scottish Parliament, education and training, environment, health including NHS Scotland and social services, agriculture, forestry and fishing, tax-raising powers, 30% of the total taxes raised in Scotland, some aspects of social security, including disability benefits, carers allowance, winter's allowance, 15% of the Scottish Benefit Bill, fuel allowance, housing, law and order, local government, sports and the arts, tourism, economic development, including Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Trade International, Highland and Islands Enterprise and the new South of Scotland Enterprise Agency, many aspects of transport, including Scottish road network, bus policy, ports, harbours, compiling statistics, keeping public records, air passenger duty, land and building transaction tax, and landfill tax. Infrastructure already in place that would be transferred to the Scottish Government and local authorities in the event of independence. Scotland currently does not have the power to govern on these policy areas that are reserved to Westminster, but it would inherit the existing UK institutions that already exist in Scotland after independence. Pensions, benefits, social security, including 85% of the Scottish benefits budget, immigration, defence, constitutional matters, economic and monetary policy, including 70% of total taxes raised in Scotland, foreign policy, employment, broadcasting, trade and industry, nuclear energy, oil, coal, gas and electricity, consumer rights, data protection, aspects of transport, railways, and safety and regulation. There are three key issues to consider about the infrastructure that would transfer over. Firstly, some UK government infrastructure that delivers a service to Scotland, such as the Department for Work and Pensions, is already mostly based in Scotland. The employment of staff at Jobs Centre in Aberdeen, for example, would remain the same. They would simply be paid by the Scottish Government and report to a Scottish minister rather than a UK one, which then charges Scotland for the cost. The UK Government charges the Scottish Government a population percentage share of the costs of running the DWP, so cost considerations are very low in this instance. Secondly, following international precedent in the event of independence, fixed assets located in Scotland, such as buildings, airbases and land owned and operated by the UK Government in Scotland, would transfer ownership to the Scottish Government. Fixed assets in other countries, such as embassy buildings, would be split on a population percentage basis, as would non-fixed assets, such as military hardware. Some of that hardware, such as a share of the UK's nuclear weapons, would not be desired by, nor even practical for an independent Scotland. Those could be traded for military assets best suited to Scotland's needs, such as aircraft and naval vessels. Independence would also give rise to other considerations, such as whether serving military personnel would be offered the chance to choose in which armed force to serve. Would the UK's nuclear submarine fleet maintain a temporary base in Scotland in return for rent, or Scotland receiving a larger share of other assets? Scotland's population share of UK government embassies and assets would be in addition to the Scottish Government's current independently funded international trade offices in Brussels, Washington, Ottawa, Toronto and Beijing. Scottish Development International also has 33 offices in 22 foreign states. New infrastructure and new public sector employment required as a result of independence. Essentially, the only major institutions Scotland would need to establish from scratch would be a central bank, a financial service authority, and other financial regulators, assuming alignment with EU financial regulations. According to research carried out by the London School of Economics, this would require 1,500 staff and cost £50 million over 5 years. However, at the current rate of tax, those staff would return £30 million to the Scottish Treasury. 6,640 public sector jobs would need to be created or transferred to Scotland to build the governance infrastructure. The transition costs over 5 years, including the £50 million for banking and financial regulation, would be £439 million. The additional tax and national insurance revenues to Scotland would be £75 million, meaning a net cost of £364 million. To put that into context, as part of the UK, the cost to Scotland of the refurbishment of the Palace of Westminster will be around £300 million over the same period, a cost that Scotland won't have to meet if it becomes independent. Please note that Scotland is already in the process of creating its own national investment bank to facilitate investment into sectors such as sustainable energy production and innovative industries with high growth potential. This is a policy decision that is not necessarily part of an independence process. Observations on government infrastructure. Scotland possesses highly developed infrastructure and has significant advantages over other nations in terms of security and sustainability of vital power and water supplies. Devolution has given Scotland a head start in the process of setting up the infrastructure required to become a self-governing nation. This doesn't mean that independence will be easy or that it won't have some costs associated with it, but there will be no infrastructure issue that would hinder an independent Scotland's economic success. Most of the UK public sector workers that provide services to Scotland already work in Scotland, and so in most cases government delivery of these services would not look any different. As for the costs of transition and change, these are relatively small, as devolution has already done much of the heavy lifting. There will be some jobs which will relocate to other parts of the UK and vice versa, but the Scottish Government has confirmed there will be no redundancies due to independence. Setting up a central bank is the major investment required. However, the ability to manage monetary policy and set exchange and inflation rates in the long term that are tailored to Scotland's needs means it is an investment that will create powers which will be a massive advantage to the Scottish economy. You can purchase your own copy of Scotland the Brief at www.businessforscotland.com.
IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLive.Radio.